So now that we're on the bye week, is it time to adjust our expectations for these Vikings? Let's revisit some old opinions here on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
Ooh-wee! You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome in to another episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I am your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. Show is on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Birddogs, the most comfortable shorts, pants, and sweatpants with built-in liners. Go to birddogs.com, use promo code Locked On, and boom, free Birddogs rope hat with your pair of Birddogs. You can also find Locked On Vikings on Amazon Fire Stick or Roku. If you have that kind of thing, you can get the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. It's our own app for Locked On Vikings, Twins, Wild, Wolves, etc., and Locked On Minnesota Sports, Gophers. You can find all of that on Amazon Fire or Roku. Pretty cool stuff. So let's get into Twitter Tuesday. It is the mailbag episode. If you have questions, you can send them to me at Locked On Vikings or at Luke Braun NFL on Twitter. You can fill out the Google form in the show notes. You can also send me an email to lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com. First one comes from DJ, who asks, have the Vikings expectations changed after the hot start? I think absolutely, right? My expectations, at least, were like maybe they like sneak into the playoffs, but really I just wanted them to look like they were on the right trajectory. Well, they have accomplished that goal. They look like they're on a trajectory towards something that is genuinely competitive, right? A lot of problems, stuff to do in the offseason. We'll get into all of that, but they are clearly on a path that makes sense. This is a build that is going to become something coherent. Whether or not that thing wins a Super Bowl, time will tell, right? But for me, you got to win the division in this position. You're 2 games up. The next closest team is in shambles, bickering amongst themselves, 3-3 and unhappy. And the other 2 teams in the division don't exist. You have to win the division out of this position. And that was definitely not the expectation before. So that expectation changes. But for me, I want to see this team, before I just wanted to see them be kind of on their way to something, right? I just wanted to see them be coherent. But now I want to see them be complete. Right now they're incomplete. The roster is what it's going to be, right? The roster is an intentional thing. There are holes and we can make offseason moves, but it's an intentional roster, but it's not a complete product yet. They're still, and the coaches are saying this too, and the players are saying that, we're still learning. We're still learning how to communicate. We're still learning how to incorporate things. They are layering new stuff in week after week, and they're getting more used to stuff week after week. They're layering in new communications week after week. I think there was a big breakthrough in this Miami game when it comes to communication on offense. And you could kind of see it happen like live, like in the third quarter. I think there was a moment. That is all great stuff, but I don't want to be talking about it in December and January. Make the playoffs, win the division, play your home playoff game, win or lose. I don't want to come back and hear, well, we busted a bunch of coverages and we're still learning the language and we're really excited for next year when everybody's a little more used to it. No, I want this to be a complete thought. I want this offense to be a complete idea, this defense to be its final form. I want to see what that looks like. Let's see how that holds up in the playoffs. I don't want that excuse to still be ringing out in December and January. So be complete, win the division. Those are now the expectations, or call them the goals now. Obviously, if you're the Vikings, the goal is get into the playoffs, win the Super Bowl, always, right? Like that's just the default. But for me, my expectation, what I want to see, what I'd be happy if I saw, NFC North champs and a complete thought. Zach Hicks of Locked On Colts asked a question, not directly, but I thought it was interesting. Said, Chris Reed for a 7th. Similarly, Steph MVP said, why is Chris Reed inactive? So this isn't a rumor or anything. This is just a Locked On Colts guy who they need a guard desperately. They've got injuries. They've got offensive line issues. So they're like, why don't we get Chris Reed back from the Vikings? And he is a huge Chris Reed guy. So this is kind of his brand a little bit, but I thought it was interesting. So I put out a tweet. I said, what does everybody think? Chris Reed for a 7th? And I just was like inundated with like, no, absolutely not. We don't have, we wouldn't have any depth. That would basically make Oli Udo the primary backup guard. People aren't comfortable with that. And a 7th isn't enough. So I said, okay, let's up the ante. What about a 5th? And I did a poll. And at least among my sample of people who follow me on Twitter and saw that poll, was like 70% said yes to Chris Reed for a 5th. So I guess that's the answer. Personally, and there's a lot of questions about what about this guy at the deadline? What about these? What about the Panthers at the deadline? We talked about that last mailbag. For me, I don't think the Vikings should do anything at the deadline. I'm perfectly comfortable with them totally standing pat. I don't think they're major sellers, right? They're not like having a fire sale like Carolina. I don't think they're major buyers. It's not the NBA where, you've got 6 teams that are selling off all their pieces because they realize they're not going to be contenders. In the NFL, a 3-game win streak can completely change the tenor of your season. A 3-game win streak in the NBA or NHL or MLB is barely a blip on the radar. And so for that reason, everything's going to be a little bit more resistant, and you're going to be swimming upstream a lot more to get those deals done. So the trade deadline in the NFL just is never the spectacle it is in other sports. And I think the idea of trade deadline means a flurry of action, almost like a free agency to a lot of people that watch football and other sports. I'm not one of those people. And so to me, the trade deadline is just sort of a random day, and like 4 deals will happen. And and they'll all be for day 3 picks. They'll be like the Robbie Anderson trade, and you kind of shrug your shoulders and go, okay. Why Chris Reed is inactive is just a numbers game. It's not a merit thing. It's a Oli Udo can also play tackle thing. If a guard goes down, you have Oli Udo go into the game and finish out that game. And then I think over the course of the next week, Chris Reed would actually be the one taking the reps and would be the one actually going and playing. That's what I believe happens if a guard goes down. But if tackles go down, you have Blake Brandel and Oli Udo, and you can lose a guard and a tackle and be covered that way. You can lose guard, tackle, and center. You still have Austin Schlottman covering that. So you have one backup for center, which makes Chris Reed's position of flexibility not as useful in the middle of a game. But if they suffer injuries on the offensive line throughout the week, and you're talking about who's actually going to go play, I think Chris Reed, I would hope Chris Reed plays before Oli Udo plays at guard, but you'd have Udo limp you to the end of a game. And he dresses because he can play more positions, right? And they actually have him in as 6th OL. So Oli Udo has a lot more utility for being active on game day. But if there actually is a long-term injury, I think Chris Reed goes in before Oli Udo. Squeaks says, thoughts on Patrick Jones and his role on the team going forward. I think his role is the same, honestly. He looks like he belongs as a rotational defensive end in the NFL. And maybe if he can grow a little bit more and be a little bit more consistent as a pass rusher, then we can start talking about bigger roles than that. But I think he's got to improve before he does that. That said, this is a great place to be. You could carve out a career doing this. It ain't nothing wrong with being just a guy like that, right? And a great game against Miami, a couple of sacks, and earned sacks too. Just beat a guy for a sack. That's great. Even though the Miami offensive line was really bad, you're a backup, right? You're supposed to probably go toe-to-toe with guys that are technically second teamers on Miami because they're dealing with a lot of backups. They were banged up. The thing about Patrick Jones that I love is how he plays the option. Now, he's an ACC guy, so he saw read option all through college. So he's really, really honed, and you can see all that experience. The way he plays the option is really aggressive when he's got a key or when he's got like I'm taking the quarterback no matter what. He's really aggressive about it. And when he's reading it, he can read it really fast and pursue really fast. He's really good at those read option, zone option defense plays. And I think that can be a really special role for him going forward. But otherwise, he's a rotational guy. Spell Daniil Hunter. And if you can beat a left tackle for a sack when you're the spell guy, that rules. Gary Kreutzberg says, do you think the reason the offensive line and specifically Bradbury has graded so much better this year is due to different coaching technique? No. I do not see any techniques that are particularly different with Garrett Bradbury. I don't see any actual mechanical things that are different with Bradbury. He's getting more help. He was on an island a lot more in the Zimmer years. He's getting a lot more help from Ed Ingram and from Ezra Cleveland and from being part of slides. His job is just less hard, and that would explain and in ways that I don't think PFF is comfortable working into its grades. If you're split in a double team, they'll give you a better grade than if you're, just a guy in the backside of a run play not doing anything or something like that. They have some mechanics for that, but I don't think they're fully comfortable with trying to suss out protection calls and stuff and adjusting for that. But I am, because I'm not a huge apparatus trying to get even grades, even playing field for every single player. And so I can more comfortably say, yeah, I think he's getting more help. And that's the point. Wasn't great against Miami at all, though. Sports Guy asks, I know things might change between now and the end of the season, but through week 6, what positions do the Vikings need upgrade at the most, and what positions are playing the worst overall for the Vikings thus far? What they need, well, it's probably the same question, right? Slot corner, and I would love some interior offensive line. Going into next offseason, you're not giving Brad Barrett another contract. I don't think he's earned that. He would have to play significantly better for the rest of the season for me to say, hey, let's actually extend this guy. So you're looking for a center, I think. And I think you're looking for a slot corner. Chandon Sullivan's on a 1-year deal, and I think it's the same deal. Even if you do want to excuse a lot of the communication mistakes and just getting killed by Tyreek Hill a couple times, you're not bringing that guy back, right? Get another 1-year deal on a slot corner or something. Now, before we get into the rest of this Twitter Tuesday mailbag, let me talk to you about the weather. It's getting chilly, and that means it's time for some good fall wear. And that is what Birddogs pants are perfect for. They're perfect for golf. They're comfy. They've got liners on the inside, so they keep you warm. They're comfortable as heck. It doesn't matter if it's, Miami muggy heat, like what the Vikings played in, or if it's 10 degrees out and you're trying to sneak in one last round right before Thanksgiving, which I know some people who do that. It's a thing. I see you. Wear your Birddogs. You can go to birddogs.com and enter promo code LOCKEDON. They'll throw in a free Birddogs rope hat. That's birddogs.com, promo code LOCKEDON, and boom, free Birddogs rope hat with your pair of Birddogs, the most comfortable shorts, pants, and sweatpants with built-in liners. You will not take these things off, I promise you. It's also hiring season, and if you are an operator of a small business, that means you got to put that job opening on LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn is a huge network. Millions of people find their jobs, find their perfect candidate on LinkedIn Jobs. It's a really overwhelming and stressful process to find that perfect person. There's so many resumes to go through. And let's be honest, you do not have time to sift through all that volume and do it all justice. That's what LinkedIn Jobs is for. Their screening questions and all of their tools help you sort through and get that person that is right for the job that you need and find that new perfect member of your small business. So find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. If you want more in-depth stuff about this, film breakdowns, more visuals, you can find my Patreon, patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. I'm going to go over some of the defensive scheme stuff, some of the things that I noticed, and especially over the bye week, be able to zoom out a little bit. I'm really excited for some of the stuff I have planned there. So go to patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. Moving on with this Twitter Tuesday mailbag. Next one comes from Old School, who, I get it, who says, is it realistic to expect any scheme comprehension and cohesion improvement coming from a bye week? Yeah, definitely. If there is not, I kind of think that's a problem. They are going into a self-scout here, and when you're in the week-to-week grind, that's a lot of stuff to do, and most of what you're doing in the week is preparing for the upcoming team and specific to the upcoming team. So you don't have a ton of time to zoom out and look at things on a big level or to do general stuff. You're not working on a new pass rush move. You're not ironing out those kinds of kinks. You're getting ready for the Miami Dolphins. And so on the bye week, when you're not getting ready for, the Arizona Cardinals or whoever, you can take that time to sort of try to iron out those little issues. And for some teams, it's just like a rest. Let's all just get healthy, that kind of thing. But for the Vikings who have an earlier bye, I do think that it's reasonable to expect that they do a little bit of that work. So I hope they can come out a little bit more cohesive. That's a great word for it. But we'll see. Patrick Nisler says, will Lewis Seen stay around the team and attend the same meetings he would have if he didn't get hurt, so he'll really master the playbook and maybe be ready for year 2, or does rehab take him away from that? Unfortunately, rehab will put a dent in that. It just takes a lot of time. He will be in the same like meeting rooms a lot and stuff, and you can schedule it around meetings so he doesn't miss stuff, but you're not drilling it, you're not practicing it. It absolutely puts his development behind where it otherwise would have been. And so when he comes out for year 2, it's kind of rookie year take 2. That's the way that I'm probably going to approach it. But, on his own time, he can still study, he can do mental reps, he can do what he can do, right? And they'll have him do that. But rehab is a time-consuming process, especially with an injury like that. Josh Johnson asks, didn't I see them convert to a 4-3 technique at the fourth quarter? From what I saw, it worked beautifully. I don't know if I want this to continue or if they're close to success for the 3-4. So you probably saw nickel, which in every 3-4 defense, if you go to nickel, it becomes 4-2-5. And then if the offense like condenses their formation, you get a safety or a nickel corner in the box, and it suddenly looks like a 4-3. But no, they did not go to the traditional 4-3 Mike Zimmer thing. That's not like a change that they made or an adjustment that they made. It just is how certain personnel packages go, and that is like a part of the defense. But that wasn't. They have not made an overarching like scheme change in the Miami Dolphins game that's going to like undermine the purpose of the defense or anything like that. That's how it always works. MN Hopes asks, the advantage of the 4-3 defense is simplicity and execution, and the advantage of the 3-4 is complexity and confusion. I don't know if I agree with that as like a blanket thing, but I get what you're getting at, right? That the 3-4 can have a little bit more variability, more flexible pieces. In the 4-3, I think the advantage of that is specialization. We have the downsides of the 3-4 defense so far. What complexities could be added in the form of blitzes to improve the pass rush? I think we saw a lot of answers to this question in the Miami game. One of my Patreon videos this week is going to be about those pressures because they had a lot of different ones and a lot of them worked. And we haven't really seen that yet. And that might just be because they didn't feel comfortable executing them yet. It might just be because the Vikings knew they were going to go up against a rough offensive line. So let's pressure it. Let's stress it. Let's get a lot on the third string quarterback, that kind of thing. And when I say pressures, I don't mean only blitzes. The 4-man pressures that are games and stunts are also part of your pressures package. It's just that they don't require people to come out of the coverage to do it. So I think there are some examples of that and adding that layer of complexity. And then the other thing that we haven't seen a lot yet this year that we're hopefully going to see more of as the year goes on is middle of field close coverages, the cover 3s, the cover 1s, that can allow more of those pressure packages to happen, but also require a really good communication. There's like a really good example of cover 3 as run by the Miami defense. It was one of those plays that Kirk Cousins changed the play, and it was a disguise. He thought he saw a 2-high safety, but it was a 1-high look that was disguised. He got a little bit. It was one of the checkdowns to Irv Smith on like 3rd and forever that you're going, why is he throwing that? The Dolphins defense did a great job of passing things off from corner to safety, deep routes and stuff. And when the Vikings can get to that point, they can vary up their coverages a lot more. Right now, you can't really disguise a coverage because you can only run like 2 coverages. So that also adds a layer. Hey, before we finish out this mailbag, let me talk to you about PrizePicks. It's daily fantasy made easy. Daily fantasy traditionally is a nightmare. You have to put together a whole team. You're competing with 6,000 other people in the big pool. It feels like you're playing a lottery. Instead, do PrizePicks. You can just pick 2 to 5 players, and it's you against the house, not you against a million sharps that sit there and spend hours doing this all day. It's just you against the PrizePicks projection, more than or less than, and that's it. You can win up to 10 times your money. And if you go to PrizePicks.com or download the app, you can get that on the App Store or Google Play. Enter promo code Locked On, and you can get a 100% deposit match up to $100. That means you put in $100, you get $100. Put in 50, get 50, and so on. That's PrizePicks.com or the PrizePicks app. Promo code Locked On. A few more questions to get through on this Twitter Tuesday mailbag. Pokemon Success Enthusiast says, is this bye week as well-timed or not? Feels like it could ruin the momentum of some of the lucky breaks the team has benefited from, but another week to become more familiar with the scheme can't be bad, especially for young guys who could help the defense sooner. So I think it is because the bye week, I think, will help the defense get together, and you want to play as many games in that better, more familiar state as possible, right? You don't want to buy that so early that it becomes a health issue, which is what the Vikings requested. But I do like the timing in that sense. The quote unquote lucky breaks that they're getting, some of it's making their own luck, right? Like a penalty feels really lucky, but if you beat an offensive lineman so bad that he had to hold you, like you kind of did earn that. Sometimes it's not, right? Or if you beat a corner so bad he's got to commit pass interference or give up a catch, you earned that. An eligible man downfield, that's just those guys screwing up and you take it. But I don't think that there's a momentum to that kind of lucky break. I think that it is just luck. It just will. It's coin flips. Like fumble luck is the same thing, or officiating luck. I don't think there's much of a momentum to that can be disrupted. So I like the timing of this bye just fine. Ryan asks, given the per game bonuses that keep coming with Za'Darius, would you plan to convert his salary to pay for his stellar play, or should we just sit him when the Bucks run out? So, his incentives, I believe, are in the not likely to be earned category. I believe whether or not they're likely or not likely to be earned. If you go over the cap, paying incentives, let's say you've got $1 million of cap space and Darius Smith earns $2 million of incentives, you do not become just like cap uncompliant and you have to make a move or you can't play the game, right? That's not how it works. Whatever the overflow is just gets put on next year's cap and it becomes kind of next year's problem. And so if we need to restructure contracts because Darius Smith hit all of his incentives, we can do that, but you wouldn't want to do it now. You would want to do it kind of when it's that chapter of the offseason, so that you've got more information about who you're keeping, what you're doing. You know, there's decisions we need to make. You don't know if Garrett Bradbury plays a Pro Bowl level for the next 10 games. That's going to change the way you approach what you restructure, what you do. And you also don't know exactly what the amount is for the incentives. So that can comfortably be March's problem or February's problem. And we'll talk about that stuff when we get there. East Coast Vikings fan says, what has been your worst Vikings take or prediction? And what was your best one? Boy. There's a lot of bad ones from way back in the day. My first article that I ever wrote, where I decided I was like a really avid member of the Minnesota Vikings Reddit, and I would do these really long write-ups, and I was like, I should just write articles. And so I called somebody I messaged somebody that I knew had a blog, Joe Johnson. He started Purple PTSD, later bought Vikings territory, rest his soul. I got in touch with him and I said, let me write an article. My very first piece, probably not even up on the site because the site's like crashed. It was a vehement defense of Mike Wallace. And that's a pretty bad take. But my worst was probably, it has to be 2016 offensive line. I wrote a preview article that because they had undone position switches with guys like Brandon Fusco and that they had Andre Smith, that the 2016 offensive line was going to be good. Now, you may not remember specifically what year was what, but 2016 was the Jake Long, TJ Clemmings, Jeremiah Searles year. That was probably the worst whiff. My best Vikings prediction, I don't know. That I like shy away from the kinds of predictions that you can go back and take like victory laps on, I guess. I think the pieces that I'm most proud of are descriptions of what did happen rather than predictions of what will happen. If I had to take a victory lap on something, it was probably, I got in some pretty long arguments with people who thought that the Vikings would cut Anthony Barr so they could start Eric Wilson. Eric Wilson is currently a special teamer on the Green Bay Packers, and he has like failed to make teams. And Anthony Barr like reclaimed some level of pretty good plays, doing okay in Dallas too. But people who thought Wilson was better than Anthony Barr were really wrapped up in like tackle stats, and I think there was like a PFF grade thing in there. And it was pretty clear, and you could even listen, like Mike Zimmer like explained this to us, and people just didn't listen to it. And I'm pretty happy with a couple of pieces that I wrote that really accurately presented that situation. Stezo asks, what was your favorite bit of Monday's Locked On Packers show? Plug. Go listen to Locked On Packers if you want to hear some salt. Be nice. But Peter had Peter Bukowski, Locked On Packers, all-time rant against the Packers for that loss against the Jets. They looked really ugly. I think he called it a full-scale pants pooping. That would be my highlight. That is a very good quote, and it only went up from there. Norse Code asks, name a Packer who's playing better than this year than he was last year. Zadarius Smith. That's probably it, right? Well, he was injured, but Zadarius Smith is on fire. Better than he was in 2020 as well. Brandon Fisher says, where does the Kirk Cousins iced out pick rank on the chaos meter? So if for the uninitiated, for those who are not on Twitter and following me, I after every game I have a chaos meter that measures the chaotic nature of Kirk Cousins' game. Was it too chaotic? Not chaotic enough? Just the right amount of chaotic? And it's filled with like all the little in-jokes and memes of Kirk Cousins' time here. The chain picture from the plane home from London, where he's wearing Christian Darrisaw's chain, is currently at the top of the meter, right in the green. I believe it's above the word frick on the meter. That's the original chain picture. So any other chain-related shenanigans, you can assume go in that same spot. And then Zach Walters says, would you ever consider having longer episodes? Not on this show, not on Locked On Vikings. For one, Locked On podcasts are all a half hour long. There's like 27 minutes, I think is the goal, which I hit it sometimes and I don't hit it sometimes. And then it's the 3-segment format is universal to Locked On. So it would have to be like on a different show, which I have no real reason to do that anytime soon. So no, but again, if you want more bonus content, if you want content that does not follow strict regulatory like formats or anything like that, that's what Patreon is for. So go to patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. It's way more free flowing. I'm not worrying about clickbait. I'm not worrying about if this is what people are gonna like want to hear about. I'm just vibing and doing tape mostly, and there's occasionally a rambly blog post. No editors, it's just like raw me. Then that is very refreshing, and I'm very happy that people have signed up for it. If you want to sign up, you can find patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. I would appreciate it a lot. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about some tape. I'll go into some in-depth stuff I already teased a little bit, but we'll talk about that then. I'll see y'all then, and as always, Skull.